Hello, everyone. I'm Alana,
And I'm Illy.
and this is Art.
Hypothetically.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, for episode 2, we are discussing the wonderful world of imposter syndrome.
Womp womp.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. Not a fun thing, but something that a lot of artists experience, and we thought was an important topic to discuss because I think we both experience it.
Yeah, I would venture to say all artists have experienced, I feel like almost all people have experienced it. And I think maybe we just didn't have the right words for it until recently, or it wasn't like a more common phrase until recently.
I don't know. I just think it's something that is really important to normalize, and it's definitely a conversation that's popped up more, especially I'd say over the last year. Like I've seen a lot of articles over the past year discussing imposter syndrome, and I think maybe it's because of the pandemic and everyone's heightened sense of, oh no, bad things.
I think there's a heightened pressure too for some weird reason that like people need to go into this horrible time and come out like a butterfly, and so there's like pressure on artists to like find themselves and make that big break or whatever in this really horrible time for the whole world, and that's a lot of pressure.
So before we get too much into the topic, let's discuss what imposter syndrome is defined as. Like when you Google it, it's like the basic definition is doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud in what
Oof,
it is that you're doing. And I'm like, oh, okay.
that's like actually more harsh than I personally like resonate. I've never like Googled it. Ooh, feeling like a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Those are harsh words.
Yeah, Google
How do you,
really came for me. I was like,
right?
okay.
So how do you feel about that?
I feel like you said it's harsh words, but it is also kind of accurate because when I think of imposter syndrome, it's like I don't feel like I deserve this, or I don't feel like I am worthy enough of what it is
Yes.
that I'm doing, or maybe the response that it's getting. I don't know how to really describe it. It's hard to put it into words, but I guess it kind of, even though it's harsh, it kind of makes sense to me. But the doubting your abilities part is definitely more of where the imposter syndrome resonates with me. It's like doubting myself.
That's fair. Yeah, I think the self-worth aspect for me was more where I kind of sit with imposter syndrome, like you said, like this is really awesome, but why? Like what do you see in me? Because I don't see it, that kind of thing. Like associating the word fraud with imposter syndrome is kind of freaking me out, I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's it's true, and I'm sure that that's someone's truth, and I'm sure like if we as we sit here and talk about it for the next 40 something minutes, I'm gonna be like, oh dang, I'm a fraud.
That's not the goal though. That's not the goal with this podcast. The goal is to talk about it, address it, and then figure out how we overcome it. That's the goal.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Ultimate goal. Like you said in the beginning, imposter syndrome can affect anyone. It doesn't matter if you're an artist. Like in any, I feel like career field especially, imposter syndrome is definitely a thing. I do feel like it also disproportionately affects artists, probably more so than other careers, because art is such a personal thing. And as we kind of explored in the first episode, like defining it even is a hard thing to do because it changes for different people. So imposter syndrome with art can feel deeply personal in a way that it might not with other things. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I was just taking some notes because I had thoughts. um I agree. I do think that imposter syndrome can be across any career. I'm curious if there are people outside of the career sphere who feel imposter syndrome. That might be something to talk about. Yeah, so like somebody who maybe gets a promotion could still experience imposter syndrome, but like I'm talking about like maybe like a lawyer or someone in a more like conventional 9 to 5 office type situation, or even like medical things like that. You can get a promotion, you could be rewarded for your hard work, and you can rationally be able to point to the places where you theoretically earned that title or that praise or that recognition, because it's a little bit more it's more dictated by that hard work. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like for artists, there is a certain degree of just raw talent and good timing and luck sometimes. And I guess good timing and luck can also apply to other things, but sometimes you just happen into the right audience, or it resonates at the right time and you get that recognition, or you go a little viral, or whatever it is that is causing that imposter syndrome. And it may not have been the result of 5-10 years of hard work and schooling that you might think another career might have landed you. So I think that it's like a little bit of whiplash sometimes, I feel like, with art. Alternatively, you can go through 10 years of nothing. Like you can go through 10 years of trying to get jobs, or trying to make it freelance, or trying to run your own business, or anything of that sort, and come up short, and it has nothing to do with your quality of work. It's a crapshoot. I just said all of that to say it's a crapshoot. But yeah, I think for me, that's the like aspect of no rhyme or reason is kind of what I struggle with.
That's definitely a huge factor in it, because like you said, there is no rhyme or reason to it. Sometimes it's a crapshoot. Like you can work as hard as you possibly can and get almost nowhere. And then someone who does one viral video gets all of this success overnight. But then does the person who has the one viral video, do they then feel imposter syndrome because they just, like, the algorithm favored them and they blew up overnight, and so they're like, I didn't work for 10 years to do this, or maybe they worked for 10 years to do that but it wasn't on social media. Like there's just so many factors that go into how different people present their art, especially with social media. It's like literally anyone at any time could feel imposter syndrome for 20 different reasons. And I think a huge factor in it too is audience response to what it is that you're putting out there. Because if you're sitting there and you're wondering yourself, like, why me? Why is this happening to me? And then you have people in the comments being like, why you? Why is this happening to you? It's like, then you're like, oh God, like, even though I'm working really hard, do I actually deserve this? Because I'm already questioning myself. And now you have this group of people over here who's also like, you're not worthy of that.
Yeah, sometimes the negative reinforcement and the positive reinforcement are the same. If you get a ton of positive reinforcement, everybody's like, you're the shit, like this is amazing, like whatever they're kudosing, whatever they're trying to reward you for or praise you for, that can cause the imposter syndrome, because you're like, well, this is really kind and this is really nice and I really appreciate it because it's awesome, but why? And then you're questioning the why, and then you start reading other folks questioning the why, and it's like that negative reinforcement is positively reinforcing your own negative feelings, and it's just a cyclical garbage heap of emotions. And yeah.
I think another part of that too, like that you touched on, was like when people are positively reinforcing you and you don't know how to respond to that or accept that. Like I have a really hard time accepting praise or like any type of positive response. Like my initial reaction to someone saying, this thing that you made is awesome, is
I'm curious, do you have an easy, like if you have pride of ownership of something, if you work really hard on something and you present it and to the world and you're happy with it, are you more apt or more comfortable accepting that praise because you're like, yeah man, I worked really hard on this and it looks awesome? Or is it just a full, like, it doesn't matter, you're always going to find a flaw, or you're always going to know that you think that you know that you could do better? And so like, is there a line there?
I think that's always been hard for me. And maybe it has something to do with my anxiety, but even if I am proud of something, I usually find flaws with it. And I usually am like, I beat myself up over it a little bit. It's not just like, oh, well, I'll do this better next time. It's like, wow, I could have really done better than it's really, it's like a cycle of self-deprecation. It's something that I'm trying to work on. I know it's very hard because I'm not like that towards other people. Like, I'm just like that towards myself. Like, if you were to post a painting, I would just like, I'd be like, that's beautiful. Like, I would not find flaws with it like I find flaws with myself. It's kind of like, would you talk to your best friend the way that you are talking to yourself? No,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't. You would never do that.
There was a lot of like negative self-talk when I taught at a paint and sip studio, because people like anytime, I guess maybe because I had an art, like a little bit of an art background when I went to go do these paintings before I worked there. But I always went for like the party vibe and it was fun. But a lot of people went to these paint and sip classes with no intention of sipping. And they just wanted to make a painting and they wanted to display it in their house and they wanted to be proud of it. And so there was a lot of negative self-talk from the people in my classes. And I was just like, would you turn to the person you came with and say these words to them? Because I don't think you would. And if they were sipping and they were drunk, they would be like, yeah, man, I would. But yeah, it's true. We are our own worst enemies, particularly. I don't know what it is about creating, maybe because the concept and the item like starts and stops with you, but we're definitely doing it to our own detriment all the time.
For me, there's a line between helpful criticism and people just being mean. The mean stuff
Yeah.
I look at and I'm like, okay, that is what it is. Like, people are
Right.
just going to be mean, and there's nothing that you can really do about it. But I think that to an extent, criticism is very helpful, like, because it can help you improve the quality of your work, or like maybe address things that you hadn't thought of before. And for me, like, reading comments that are like, hey, I like this, do you think you could do this in the future, that's more helpful. It's like people saying what they would like to see. That is very different from people just ripping into you. I was watching a video the other day, and it was an author on YouTube. She has like an author tube channel, and she talks about, like, to an extent, she will read her reviews. Like, she'll read her book reviews up until I'd say about like 2 or 3 weeks after the book is published, and then she doesn't look at them anymore, because at that point she's, gotten pretty much all of the feedback that she feels she's gonna need. She has those initial reviews and the thoughts, and positive and negative, and then if she just keeps reading them, for the rest of eternity after the book is published, it's not going to really help her, because the book's already out. She already knows what the general response is, good and bad.
I do feel that criticism, and I mean, I guess it depends on the medium and the field, because like you're talking about books and you're talking about maybe like film or videos like you do, and that is something that you kind of are expecting ongoing criticism for. And I don't think necessarily that the same is true for like printed media or paintings or like regular fine art. Yes, like if it's on display and people are seeing it regularly, people are going to have opinions. But for me, criticism, like in school, like we would have crit, like that would be part of our project. And that was fine because it was expected and asked for at that time. So like if I'm posting a painting or a photo on Twitter or anywhere and I'm not like explicitly asking for opinions, I don't know that I am welcoming them. The praise is always welcome, but like the constructive criticism, unless it's something like culturally important, like if I miss the mark on something and it's like, no, this is really like offensive, then obviously I need to be told that. But yeah, it is, I feel like the criticism aspect of it and the timing of that criticism is definitely dependent on the medium and also the presentation of it. Yeah, I never thought about that, how certain media has the expectation of ongoing criticism.
Yeah, like it's like when you're publishing a book, you just expect book reviews for the rest of eternity, because that's just the culture surrounding it. And book reviews, like, too, like people can change their minds over time. It's like 1 year the book is the best thing in the entire world, and then a few years down the road you're like, actually there's a lot of issues with this, which I think is important. Like, if it's culturally insensitive and no one talks about it, and then a few years later you're like, let's revisit this. Like,
yeah, that's happening a
something that I
lot
see a
now.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think that that's people are dubbing it cancel culture and things like that. I don't think it's cancel culture. It's personal growth, and it's becoming aware of not so rapid. Like, people think that the change is happening rapidly, but it's really not. You're just being made aware of it rapidly. So that's a whole nother
whole other podcast episodes. But when we're talking about like criticism, like what you were saying, if you post something and you're not really like, it's like a painting and you're not really asking for criticism, or maybe it just doesn't do as well as you thought it was going to, and you're like, well, then I guess it's just not that great.
Yeah, actually, like, now that you phrase it like that, I think that second one is like more of what would bother me. Which is also leading, like, this whole social media like need for attention and this likes thing, like, that has really, I think, caused a whole lot of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I guess with art, like, your intention, we talked about this last week, your intention is like kind of to make people think and to make people have feelings. So I guess if they're sharing those feelings appropriately, no matter if they're positive or negative, I guess by putting art out in the world, you are kind of implicitly asking for the criticism. I guess that makes sense. I didn't really think about it like that until right now.
I mean, it's the same thing with anything you put on social media. You have to be aware of the fact that people are gonna comment on it, and you're immediately opening yourself up to be compared to other people, which is another big thing. It's like social media. I mean, this is a whole other episode that we could do just about social media and art and how it's changed art. But like, comparing yourself to other people on social media is a huge thing that feeds into imposter syndrome. And like, sometimes other people will compare you to other artists on social media, and then you'll be like, oh, like, I wasn't even comparing myself to that person, but now I kind of am because you just did. And it's like this whole never-ending cycle.
Well, because there's more access than there's ever been. Like, I saw somebody tweet, this is not necessarily art related, but it was like 50 years ago, if you wanted to see a picture of a penguin, you had to have the picture. I don't know if the penguin was in the example, but if you want to see a picture of a penguin, you had to already have a picture of a penguin, or you had to go either to your own thesaurus or to a library to look up a picture of a penguin in a book. And like, just think about how rapidly access to visual media has changed. I've lived in a lifetime where there was not like home computers, or there were, but they were way too expensive for most people. So like, just in my own lifetime, Google, like, being able to search, being able to reverse image search wasn't a thing, you know what I mean? So there's almost this constant stimulus for both the artist and the audience and the people consuming the art, because they've just been exposed to so much. There's nothing, I don't want to say nothing, but there's very little new conceptually out there anymore. Everything is derivative of something else. And I think that's also like a huge part of imposter syndrome, because you're literally sometimes borrowing elements of other people's work, and it's not like frowned upon. It's not, you're not actually stealing. It's just like, oh, that style is really cool. How can I interpret it my way? But it's still originated somewhere else. So if you succeed by that, then you're like, well, dang, I didn't fully think of that on my own. Do I deserve this praise? It's all connected.
I saw a TikTok the other day about how someone doesn't like labeling their art as fan art because they think that it's immediately going to be devalued because it has the word fan in it, like fan fiction. I feel like people are getting more confident in saying that now, but people, for like the longest time, fan fiction and fan art had such a stigma around it because it was immediately devalued because it was fan something. It like, you weren't creating technically a world or characters, you were using them and making your own thing, and people devalued that right off the bat. And so like, that kind of plays into what you were just talking about, where it's like, if you're borrowing something from something else and you're using it to then make your own thing, it's like that can lead to feelings of imposter syndrome because you didn't automatically create every single thing that you were using.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also one of those things that even if you don't think about it all the time, you kind of just have this like almost societal unconscious bias about it, because I think that as art has evolved and as content creation, which wasn't a concept until, 10, 15 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
that changes, and as I think it's honestly, we have to talk about social media because it's all part of it. But like if you have access on social media to the original creator of something, and you're like a comic, let's say you have access to the person who created the original comic art, and you're making, some derivative fan art version of it, and you're posting on social media, doing so with the intention of tagging them so that they are aware. There was never a time where that was possible before. I mean, I guess you could make a copy of your artwork and mail it to someone's PO box if they publicized it, but like doing it as a form of admiration for the original instead of making a facsimile of the original has kind of changed the attitude towards fan creation, I think. Maybe that's part of it. We've been talking about praise and things like that and comments, but we haven't really been talking about success, which can be defined in so many different ways. But maybe if your goal is to make money, like if you are successful in that venture, does that change the imposter syndrome?
Or does it make it worse? Because then like it's like, do you feel like you deserve to be making this money? It depends on each person. Like what we were talking about the last episode, imposter syndrome is so different for so many people. I think confidence is a huge part of that. Like personally, even if I feel like something that I've put out there is technically successful in my definition of it, or if other people are like, hey, that's pretty successful, good job, it's like I'm always, there's always something in the back of my mind like, is it though? And that's a personal confidence thing that I struggle with. But I just always have something nagging at me being like, it's not where it could be, or it's not where it should be, or maybe I don't deserve where it is now. It's exhausting. It's feeling like you're never comfortable in anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally exhausting. So I don't know. It's something that I've been working on, and it's something that I'm still trying to work on.
For me, I think the most often, like the not the cause of the imposter syndrome, but what like puts me in the place where I can feel that way, is that I feel like I know my own personal limitations better than anyone. I know it better than my friends. I know my limitations better than my audience. What I'm putting out there is what I have the most confidence in. As an artist, I wouldn't necessarily post something I'm not super happy with or something I don't have a ton of experience with. So anything I'm putting out there, even if I see flaws in it, even if I know I can do better, like this is what I'm deeming as an acceptable level. When friends are like, oh my God, you're amazing, or oh my God, you can do anything, I'm like, but I can't. So like, I appreciate that you're my hype person, but I literally can't do what you're asking me to do, and that kind of makes me feel the imposter syndrome. And I've just recently started like learning to be okay with telling people no, and being honest with why I'm telling people. I've had people try to commission me for portraits, and I just like, I'm not confident enough in my ability to do it. I haven't done them enough. The ones I have done, I haven't been super happy with. Like certain things that I just can't do. They're not my thing. But when I have to say no, or when I feel like someone's asking something of me because they're like, oh, well, I've seen you do this. Obviously, you could do that. And then I have to say that I can't. It's like, see, I'm right. I'm not good enough. When I can't meet that expectation, that's when I kind of feel like, how many other places should I be feeling this way in?
I don't know. I feel like learning to say no is a really important thing, that it's very hard. And it's still like, it's still something that I'm not super good at either.
Mm.
But when we're talking about imposter syndrome, is like not being able to meet the expectations that people might have built up.
It's almost like being a one-hit wonder, like what you did was so good and so successful, and then everybody expects you to be able to repeat that, or to be able to do that in a different style, or the next year, or whatever the case may be. And you're like, and when you can't, or you fail, I'm using air quotes, you can't see me, but I'm using air quotes, when you fail to, by their standards or by your own, I think that can cause it. And that kind of goes into back to the self-worth, and also the actual worth, and can really screw with how you, if you're trying to do this to earn a living, how you physically value your work.
It's like comparing yourself to your past self. For me, it's like when I look at one of my old videos and I'm like, I did that. And I don't think I could replicate that or do like I'll sometimes look at videos that I did in the past and I'm like, wow, I like was really out there doing this and I feel like I can't do that anymore right now.
And that may not be true, but that feel like that you can't do it, but that feeling of inadequacy is going to be enough to stop you from trying.
Yeah.
And that's where like you really become your own roadblock, and it just builds on itself. You're saying how this is your passion and this is what you love to do, and you can't do anything other than create because that's like your calling, but then you're talking about stuff like this that makes you literally miserable and exhausted. So like the same thing that causes us happiness causes us pain. I feel like that's true about so many things. I mean,
Yeah.
even something as basic as having children, like
You have to find things that are going to give you more positive like the positives have to outweigh the negatives. And for me, the positives of creating art and putting myself out there creatively outweigh the negatives of doing that. And so like let's as we kind of come near the end of the episode talking about ways that we might overcome imposter syndrome, that's a big one for me, is like when I am really feeling it, because sometimes I do really feel it and I feel like it's important to allow yourself to feel that pain. When I'm really feeling it, I try to remind myself like the positives of creating and the way that you feel when you create outweigh this feeling that you're feeling right now of I'm not good enough and I don't deserve this and I'm not as good as XYZ. Creating outweighs that always for me.
I think I've tweeted about this or talked about this, but like I will keep like really positive comments that made me feel really good at the time. And I'll go back and read them like multiple months and years later when I'm having not a good time and be like, see, you did that, you could do it again. Or see, you made this person happy, these people happy, like it's worth it. But I've also been trying to figure out like what makes it easier for me to create as opposed to working against things. So like for me right now, particularly because I'm unemployed, like this is my job. And so when I'm not marketing myself or making a ton of sales or getting a lot of commissions, I feel more like a failure because like I'm also failing to support myself. And I'm like, well, this thing that I've invested so much time and energy into, like I'm inadequate. But I've also been finding that when I stop trying to promote myself and things like that and constantly putting stuff out there, that's when people reach out to me. And that feels really good because I'm like, well, I didn't really have to do much except exist. And people are like, oh, can you make me this? And I'm like, yeah, I can make you this. Thank you. I don't know if that makes sense to in many other situations, but I guess like just maybe taking a step back and kind of walking away for a little bit is helpful sometimes because you get so in your own head when you're making art. It's like you're myopic, like you're just single-mindedly focused on one thing at times, and sometimes you just need to take a step back and realize that there's other things out there that can be influencing the way you're feeling.
Over the past year, I've had a really hard time trying to figure out like what to do with my YouTube channel, and you can tell I talked about it a little bit publicly. I don't know, after like when everything kind of happened last year with the pandemic and then Supernatural going on its like indefinite hiatus and the end being near, but no one knew when it was actually going to happen. And, you know, obviously conventions couldn't happen anymore. And so a lot of the content that I had been making suddenly was no longer like I didn't even have an option. I couldn't make it anymore. And like for those of you who don't know, my YouTube channel was really focused on Supernatural and I loved making content about it, but it became stressful trying to figure out like how do I work my way around this when everything that I had been doing is now no longer really a thing? And I didn't really feel motivated at that point to even make a ton of Supernatural content anymore. And so then I just felt like I couldn't make videos at all. And it became this like really big mind spiral. And so what resulted from that was me just not posting very much video content. But then like earlier this year, I kind of just had this thought that I was like, you know, I don't need to just make Supernatural content. That's not even how my channel started. I was making videos about books before I even watched Supernatural. It just like I fell into this cycle of just creating Supernatural videos when I have so many other things like I could be making content about and that I'm passionate about. And I'm like, I've been limiting myself just mentally I had this roadblock up of like, you can't post anything unless it has something to do with supernatural. But no one ever told me that.
Yeah.
I told myself that.
Yep.
Like, it's my channel. I can do whatever I want. Taking the reins and realizing that kind of helped me a bit.
But I feel similarly, and I think this is really interesting about that we may have skipped over with the fan art conversation, because you definitely more so than me, but I think we may have, because I also, for people who don't know, started doing fan art for the first time a couple years ago when I started selling at supernatural conventions. So for the longest time, the only art that I was putting out there for public consumption was fan art, and that's totally fine, and I was selling it and I was making money doing it. But now I'm finding that it doesn't bring me joy. And that's not to say, like, if you were planning on commissioning me to do a supernatural painting, I will absolutely still take that commission. However, I don't intend really to make consistent fan art anymore. And that's not because, like, until something strikes me, maybe, but that's not because I'm looking down on fan art, because I'm not. There is amazing fan art. It's just because it doesn't personally, like, fulfill me anymore. So now it's a matter of like rebranding yourself and making sure your audience is going to go along with that journey. If you switch from, like, for me, if I switch from all of a sudden from painting baby and, you know, wings to studies of the female body, maybe. So yeah, that's a whole nother aspect of this. I don't even think it's a separate conversation. I think it's all part of this.
I mean, I feel like rebranding yourself as an artist it could be a different conversation, but
Oh, that's true.
like, I don't know, the feelings that come along with when you start doing a new thing and maybe it doesn't get as positive or as much of a reception as what you had previously been doing, that kind of stuff can feed into the imposter syndrome more.
Yeah.
How many times can Alana say feed into imposter syndrome? Count them.
Anybody who, maybe not anybody, but a lot of people who work in fan art or have an audience around a particular show or thing that is not going to, in theory, last forever or always hold the same weight in your life are gonna go through that. I'm gonna go through, like, it's also a matter of, like, it takes time. Like, it takes time to figure out what you want to do after you stop doing the thing you've been doing. You know, it's not always like this 2 a.m. revelation of, oh my God, this is what I need to be creating. So in that lull, I've been having a lot of that. That lull. You're like, cool, I'm an artist, but I'm not arting. So am I? Sometimes when you're trying to figure out why you create in the first place, or why you make art in the first place, or why you use a certain medium, and you're going through that evaluation, you're like, the reasons aren't good enough. This doesn't make me happy enough. I like being creative, so maybe I'll do this. Or nope, I'm done. I'm just going to do it for me when I feel like it, but I'm not going to be a consistent artist. And I think that's okay, presenting yourself to the world as one way and then changing your mind. It's all about, like, it has to be what feels right. It has to be what makes you happy. And it's okay if that changes, because we're all human and we evolve. I think sometimes the imposter syndrome, or even just the self-doubt, will come when you're evolving and you aren't, like, willing to recognize that about yourself.
I think imposter syndrome can lead to immense amounts of growth and self-realization. It's a double-edged sword. Finding out what works best for you and finding out coping mechanisms finding coping mechanisms, that's a fun word. That's important to me. Like, it's gonna sound cliche, but if I journal about something, it helps to, like, actually just get my thoughts out, even if it's just like word vomit. Like, I have a notebook that I just write my random thoughts about creating in when I get super mad or sad or something. And sometimes when good things happen too, like just getting my thoughts down, and then the whole, like, not going looking for stuff about my work or about me, and, you know, taking a break from social media and, you know, stepping away for a bit. Like, these are all things that I do when I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed with imposter syndrome. But that's just stuff that helps me, and it differs from person to person. So I feel like it's trial and error.
Definitely. I think sometimes a lot of what you talked about, like leaving, like taking a break from social media, etc., and just, like, being introspective, is because you need to stop putting yourself in front of other people besides yourself for a while.
Mhm.
So I do find that helpful.
It's all hypothetical what you do to help your imposter syndrome. This is where we ask for your opinion on imposter syndrome. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Instagram at Art Hypothetically, and we're on Twitter at Art Hypothetical because Twitter limited our character.
I'm so mad about that
No.
still.
And we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Amazon Music and YouTube. Well, that's the end of our episode about imposter syndrome. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time, hopefully. I'm Alana.
I'm Illy.
And this has been Art.
Hypothetically.